Hello, my name is Zach Wright with Old Man Gaming, and welcome to another After 50. This is a show I rarely do because this is a show that is kind of a follow-up to our Snap Judgment reviews. Basically what it is I take a game that has brought me back for more than 50 hours, that has hooked me, something that has captured my attention in a way that I would consider in my top tier lists of games that I enjoy. So with that in mind, unlike a Snap Judgment, I'm not going to necessarily go over everything that you've seen. I'm going to try not to retread the information. I'm going to try not to retread the pros and cons on an After 50. Instead, I'm trying to give you an extended look at the game and mainly tell you what I like about it at this stage and what I don't like about it at this stage and what's keeping me coming back. In addition to that, so with that said, that out of the way, my After 50 today is Skull and Bones. And this is an interesting one because I got 50 hours in right when it released. I actually am one of the, few people who didn't have a ton of criticisms to say about it in the beginning. I'm sure my old review has plenty of cons in it. But it was a game that I enjoyed. I thoroughly enjoyed, even though it definitely has some Ubisoft BS to it. Just to sum up, Skull and Bones is a naval combat game with heavy games of service and MMO elements to it, where you sail a ship in the Indian Ocean, a very fictional Indian Ocean, with monsters to slay, magic, and crazy experimental weaponry like rockets and torpedoes and flamethrowers and whatnot. If you need more description than that, go back to the original review. I get a little bit more in-depth into it, but a lot of the story plays out in context clues or running into it as you kind of go along. It's not necessarily you would follow a trend. It's much more like Destiny, but instead of a person, you're a boat sort of situation. Now, to give another disclaimer, is I was going to do an After 50 way back when this first came out at the beginning of 2024. Mainly because I put in 50 hours, and I had just decided to start this show After 50. I thought it would be a good first pick. But then the more I kind of played, and the more I got into the Endgame back in February, March when I first started, I realized that it wouldn't be necessarily a fair shake. This game tends to have a lot of things I love, but also has some stuff that makes me walk away every so often and not come back for an extreme amount of time. And like I said, I walked away, and I have only recently come back and put another 50 to 100 hours into it. A lot has changed, so I think now is a much more fair assessment of what this game would be if you were jumping into it for the long haul now than back then. They had some bugs and some issues to iron out, let's put it that way. With the After 50, just like the reviews, I will be doing pros and cons, but I'm going to be discussing them in a different way. I'm trying not to retread the pros and cons of the original video, though I'm sure I will in some way, or only retread them if there have been significant changes to them. With that said, we're going to get into it, and I always go positive first, so we're going to hit the pros first. And right off the bat, the Pieces of 8 economy has to be considered a pro. Now, in fairness, this is kind of comparatively to what it was in the beginning, so you guys are going to have to take that with a grain of salt. Maybe coming into it day one without ever having played it when it released, you would have a more negative look at it, but I've got to go with what's in my heart. And when you first started playing this game, the Pieces of 8 economy was a nightmare. What you would do, you would only get Pieces of 8 from malfactories, which were things, part of the end game. It's part of, once you get through the main story stuff, you then start to build a criminal pirate empire that's all about like illegal substances. You get that by claiming different cities that you've already been to, and then those cities slowly produce the substance for money. When they get full of the production or whatever, they produce a certain amount of Pieces of 8, and you have to go collect those Pieces of 8. Back in the day, you had to actually sail to every place that had Pieces of 8 ready. There's also sovereigns, which probably get some of the most rare stuff biggest stuff for the builds, especially back then, and you only got sovereigns by getting on the leaderboard, and you only got on the leaderboard by collecting pieces of 8. So what would happen is you would get to this end game, which just became being glorified delivery driver. You would have like 15 to 30 malefactories. You'd have to sail around the entire place for like 2-3 hours collecting different pieces of gold, pieces of 8, bring them back just to get on that leaderboard, which ended up pushing you out of some of the more fun events like the DLC story events and raid bosses and all sorts of other things, convoy attacks and whatnot. They have changed that. They've done a lot with this. So the pieces of 8 are still gained through malefactories, but there's also an easier way to get that, which we'll talk about in the next pro. But you also get pieces of 8 from raid bosses, from fighting big captains, from taking down monsters, from taking down merchant convoys. So pieces of 8 are collected genuinely from just doing end game activities, and that's the way it should be. That should be much truer, a much truer decision of your leaderboard status, as well as giving you the pieces of 8, which to make your ship the coveted level 13, the end level ship that you want it to be, you just have to earn pieces of 8 and sovereigns eventually. There's just no other way to do it. So this is good. It allows you now to play the way you want to play, and I like that. Which dovetails right into the next pro, which is ship assignments. Another thing that was not there in the beginning was you would build ships, and those ships are how you interact with the world, basically. It's how you do all your fighting and whatever. It's an action game, much akin to Black Flag, just the very basic principles, but it's still kind of... This is very different from that. Don't expect that when you come into this, but the naval combat on just the very finite level is very similar. With that being said, you build up ships as you go along. You would have, like, these ships that, like... you would have these ships that, like, you would get your first level 1 or level 2 ships. Then you would get these ships, like, as you built up, you would get to a point where you just had, like, there's 3 ships that could have that end level build. That's where you were, but you had this trail of ships leading you up to those. And those ships now you can assign, once you get a malefactory up to level 2, you can assign a ship to it, and they'll go collect the pieces of 8 for you when it fills, which is really nice. It also, depending on their level and what you put on them, is how equipped they are to get that stuff and how much they might need to be repaired afterwards, which is more of a drain on your economy, which is kind of cool too, because it gives you a reason to put the older guns and equipments on the ship that you didn't have before. So, like, or that you're not putting on your ship anymore because you're that higher level, which is really cool. I think it's a cool way to kind of, like, use some of this, like, huge wealth of equipment that you have by the time you get to the end game, and have a purpose for it that isn't necessarily, like, just sitting in your warehouse. Which actually brings me to my next pro. Another pro that wasn't there in the beginning. You can see that there's a trend here, and that's build diversity. They've got a few ships now, but in the beginning there was, like, I want to say like 6 or 7, and there was maybe 2 of them that you could make an endgame build with. Every other ship was a transitional ship. You'd start, like, the Badar, that's the level 1 ship that you get to start after you get out of just the raft. And then once you get that up to a certain level, you have to get a new ship to get bigger and better. And then there was a bunch of medium ships that you'd get, and then you try and make a build with that, but then eventually you'd have to grow out of that into one of the other bigger ships, the Snow or the Brig. That is not the way it is anymore. They've done this really interesting upgrade system now, where you can just stick with one ship and upgrade it if you like it. It'll get higher perks. Its damage and hull capacity will get on par with the bigger enemies. But what's interesting about this is it really hangs on to its characteristics and its personality. My biggest example is the Badar. It's the first boat you get out of the raft. It starts at level 1. It has some ramming abilities on the front. It's extremely fast, but just basically made out of balsa wood. If you get that up to a level 6, you get a ton of perks from ramming with it. It's still as fast, and you can stick a bunch of extra weapons on it. And it ended up prompting me to make this build where I run into people, sail away extremely fast, take huge flaming pot shots at people, basically grind on huge waves with the speed, and people can't necessarily bring me down with it. And I think that's just so cool that you could do that now. You can get these build diversities with these ships and really have some fun with the perks and doing something with them. It just wasn't there in the beginning of the game. Like I said, you got to a point where there were 2 ships. You picked one of the 2, and that was that. Now you really have build diversity within these ships. You can really use some of them for multiple different things. They've also added some weapons to it that just makes it more interesting. And I have had some of the most fun I've had in this game hasn't even been the naval combat. It's just been kind of finding pieces and parts to make a very specific type of ship the exact way that I want it, and that's really fun for the min-maxing people out there. My final pro is multiplayer freedom. This is something that was in the original game, but I did not experience a lot of multiplayer because when I first started to play the game back in the day, I didn't have any friends that played it. It was one of those games that was toxic to touch for everybody. I was the only one who was really interested in getting it and playing it. So I was kind of alone when I played. And this time around, I've gotten to play some multiplayer with some other people because of some very exclusive special deals over the Black Friday. Which has been really fun to play with them and experience the multiplayer. That all being said, the pro itself is the multiplayer allows you this weird thing where you join somebody else's game, you join their party, and then you can just do whatever you want. You don't necessarily have to do what they're doing. You could just sail over here, do this, sail over here. The ships will be a little bit tougher that you're fighting, but not so tough that you can't take them if you couldn't take them normally. Everybody will share in the mission quest rewards that are turned in from missions or quests that were accepted after the group was formed. So it's a nice way to power level your friends a little bit. It's also a nice way to hey, you're in my group, but I want to go do this for a while. You do this, and we can still just chat and hang out and still kind of run into each other when we want. I love that. The idea that you can kind of go in and out of somebody's party and in and out of doing stuff with them is really, really, really cool. And my absolute final pro is the community here. I'm actually really impressed with the community on Skull and Bones. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not asking them a bunch of questions. That's not what I'm speaking of. But what I am speaking of is, given how old this game is and how rough the reception of it and its reputation was leading up to its release was, I didn't expect so many people to be playing and helping other people with big missions. You run into... In this game, I have maybe been in 2 or 3 games where people won't show up to help you, fight big raid bosses or fight big monsters. If I send up the call for help flare, I think it is rare that I get less than 3 players showing up to help me. And that's really cool. That's just really cool. Plus, it makes for some really awesome, kind of interesting, chaotic battles at sea. Sometimes it can get overwhelming, which we'll talk about in the cons a little bit. But yeah, it is really nice to have a community that is still very into this game, which is nice. And possibly why it's still around and getting its 2nd season. I mean, that is something we didn't talk about on this. We are halfway through Season 4, and it has been confirmed that they will get a 2nd year of seasonal content for this game. So, very excited about that, although there could be some downs to it. And that's where we're going to move right into the cons. And I'm going to put 2 cons together right off the bat, and I'm just going to kind of get long-winded about them, and that would be lack of heart and lack of content. Here's the thing. This game, the things I love about it, I've just told you. In addition to that, at its core, the naval combat is awesome. There's also a lot of stuff about the story and the presentation that you can tell that the devs who are on the ground floor, the boots on the ground devs, are really putting some love into this and wanting you to have a pirate experience. And then comes the corporate Ubisoft machine and sweeps over this thing like a dark cloud. This game has so many bullshit, extra transactional, seasonal crap. It's got a whole calendar just dedicated to seasonal event bullshit. And this event stuff is like, hunt this guy, he's a little bit tougher, he gives you more of this. Hunt this guy, oh, it's Christmas, we're going to have these weird ships show up, and then you get this special kind of currency that you take it to them, and you get this for it. Here's the problem with this kind of stuff. It eats the heart away from this game. It eats the actual content away from this game. Like, they've done some really cool upgrades with the Pieces of 8 economy, the ship assignment, the build upgrades, stuff like that. But there's so much that's lacking in this. I cannot run, own, or operate a pirate den of my own. I have to use the other cities. I cannot set up a port of call. I can't, own property or have a house in any way, shape, or form. My crew on the ship, it feels feels like just NPCs walking around a boat. I can't actually hire them or fire them. I don't have any control over who they are. I can't decide who they are based on whether I like them or not. The only one that has character is the first mate, and she's carbon copy for everybody out there. There's no romance options. There's no... all the characters that you meet, all the NPCs you meet in the city, they stay in one place night or day. They're always there so that you could turn in quests and buy stuff. It's stuff like that normal MMO bullshit that just eats this game away a little bit. And I feel like this stuff would change if it weren't for that corporate dark cloud of money. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge that Skull and Bones has, is they have to spend so much time worrying about seasonal content, seasonal events, seasonal updates, seasonal blah, 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 battle passes and loot boxes and new currencies and all that stuff. I mean, there's 3 battle passes there's actually 4. There's a hidden 4th battle pass and 3 normal battle passes every season, which is insane to me. There is absolute insane amounts of currencies, which is on my cons list, so I'm just going to bury that in too. Just to name a few currencies, there's silver, your normal thing, Pieces of 8, sovereigns, tainted crystallized wood, smuggler's tokens. I'm not even remotely done, by the way, with the currencies. It's this kind of stuff. Oh, Monster's Tooth, Eternal Ashes. There's so much of this crap that just doesn't need to be here. And while it stays here, it keeps us from getting the more in-depth pirate lord simulation game that we kind of all want, right? Like, it keeps us from the cool stuff, like maybe doing some sword fights. I think a sword fighting minigame on land, which could be done very easily with kind of cut screen graphics, where you could challenge your friends to it, and it's more like almost like a rock, scissors, paper guessing game. I know that's not a huge thing, not what everybody wants, but it would still be something to add, something new. I think that there is a lot of stuff you could add to this game that just isn't there right now. And it's not going to be there as long as we have to constantly worry about these weird seasonal upgrade crapolos, and that's what's here. I mean, go ahead and add into that a little bit more. I mean, this is really the crux of all of my cons now that I'm reading my little list here. So, like, I'm just going to keep going. The bug issues. There's also a bunch of bug issues in this game. There is a bug that goes around where every so often you just lose control of your guns. You can't shoot or brace. Brace being your defensive ability in the boat. You lose this after a crew attack. And it is random whether it's going to happen or not, and it has been going on since I came back to the game. And why isn't this fixed? I'm going to tell you why it isn't fixed. Because they have to worry about upping the Megalodon. They also have to worry about making some special Christmas boats. They also have to worry about this other seasonal pass thing. And it's just too much. They need to refine their scope. They need to stop worrying about, like, getting people to spend money on the actual content, not the content, spend money on the battle passes and the clothing, and spend more time making this game deeper. And that's really what I want. I want a deeper experience here. I think this game is great. I like playing it. I feel like it would be deeper if it wasn't for Ubisoft, but because it's Ubisoft, it suffers from a lot of Ubisoft garbage and baloney that you as a player might not want to get around, might not feel up to getting around. And that's what it just comes down to. So, finally, sticking with the game, or not sticking with the game. Yeah, I'm probably going to keep playing this game. I have walked away from it for the time being, just because I feel like I've done everything I need to do in it right now. But I'll be back. I'm always back to this one, and there are a couple of Ubisoft games that always bring me back. For Honor, and now this one. That's just, every so often, I'm going to be like, time to be a pirate lord again. As long as it exists, anyway. But, I do have to say, if they're listening out there, on the off chance that they listen and monitor this, you need heart. You need content. Real content. Not content of, here's X boss that you have to fight 42 times to get X cannon. That's not content. We need real depth of game, depth of feel. That's something that is holding this game back, and I think that people will eventually lose interest if you can't give them that. So that's where this game needs to go. So, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Are you guys playing it for more than 50 or less than 50 or never touching? You guys can let me know in the comments below. You can also reach me on Facebook at OhManGamingDH, on X at OhManGaming9. You can join our Discord. Links in the description below. Influence this and all of our shows from there. And as long as you guys keep watching and listening, we'll keep making them. See you guys next time.